RugbyRenegade.com, the #1 online strength and conditioning program for rugby. Are you ready to get bigger, stronger, fitter, and faster and dominate your opposition? Welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast, where we build machines.
Today's episode is sponsored by Fizz Hydration Tablets, the convenient way to get your hydration needs, vitamins and minerals covered in one easy tablet. To get a discount of 20%, use the code SPORT20 at their checkout.
Yes, hello and welcome back to episode 66 of the Rugby Renegade Podcast. My name is Jamie Bain and today I interviewed Lee Eldridge, an experienced strength and conditioning coach who I used to bump into on the circuit when he was at London Welsh quite a lot. So it was great to catch up with him and find out what he's doing and learn about the athlete tribe. So give it a listen and let us know what you think.
Lee, welcome to Rugby Renegade Podcast. Great to have you on. Why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into strength and conditioning and some of the teams and sports you've worked with?
Yeah, so like most people, I started probably back after my undergrad in sports science and kind of knew that I definitely wanted to go into coaching, and I've always been a coach. So from an early age, I was coaching swimming, any kind of sport, field hockey, etc. And I realized then that if I wanted to kind of work with professional athletes, I needed to get a master's. So 2008. And pretty much alongside that, I realized that we needed to get internships and start to observe other coaches in elite levels and have opportunities to, maybe take sessions and do bits and pieces. So that led on to a couple of internships in football and rugby. And then really, as it goes, that I got kind of a big break by somebody who was on my master's course. And I started working for London Welsh back in 2009-10. And I spent 6 years there, which was a fantastic experience in terms of ups and downs. 2 years in the Premiership, 2 years of being relegated, going a whole year without winning a game, and trying to coach in that environment, which is pretty tough. But on the flip side of it, coaching environments where you're winning games week in, week out, and you get promoted into the Premiership. And then it was kind of a situation where my kind of career progression was stagnating a little bit. As we know that once people get into roles, kind of good roles are hard to find. Unfortunately, I was in touch with a few of the guys at Hintsa Performance, based out in Switzerland. And I started there in 2016 with the idea of working with some young motorsports athletes. And that kind of didn't work out. And I got more to work across to the corporate side. So I was working with C-suite, CEOs, doing kind of presentation workshops to corporate individuals and teams. And then I found that I really wanted to make a little bit more of a move back into sport. So last year I started as head of academy for an ice hockey team based in Geneva. And that kind of brings us round to the present time and present moment, really, in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's cool. So just kind of touch on a few things there, I guess. Firstly, moving to another country and going away from sport into different environments. What was it like in another country, different culture and things like that, as an experience working as an S&C coach?
So I thought, I went to work with Hintsa Performance, and there's an international base of coaches. So because of naturally Hintsa Performance was originally founded by Aki Hintsa, the Finnish doctor that worked a lot in Formula One. So there's a lot of Finnish guys, coaches. So really that was a good opportunity for me to have a broad experience from an international point of view. I think that every country has their own, we're all learning the same things, but every country has a different way of coaching, a different standard in terms of, reading lists and the book we read and the websites that we're influenced. So it's really good from that side. And then coming across that, basically, I was slightly naive, to be perfectly honest, that the idea was that we were trying to take what we know with working with athletes and then being able to adapt that to work with what we classed as cognitive athletes. So these seriously high performing individuals that, they're working 12, 14 hours a day, traveling the world, etc. And to try and get them to have a better lifestyle, basically. So, Hinsa is, better life, better performance. That's their founding motto. And really it was just to try and get those guys to do some simple things. And the biggest difference between a high performing athlete and a high performing cognitive athlete is that with the athlete, the sport is the main priority. So everything we build around them is designed to improve their performance. But with a corporate athlete, you've got so many more things going on that, so for example, if we're saying you need to improve or increase your general physical activity and something comes along, that just gets pushed to one side. Whereas when working with a professional athlete, that's going to be their main focus and that's going to be their main priorities. So really it was kind of those things. And then last year, in terms of working with the academies, I don't speak French, so that was a real learning curve. So with my under 20s, majority of them all have a good grasp of English. So I was able to pretty much coach full time in English. The younger guys, not so much. So it was a huge learning experience of how to adapt my coaching when you don't actually know the words to say. And what's been really good for me is, from a foundational point of view, is to work out using the simplest language and learning the simplest French language to get the points across, and constructing sessions and building out, how you communicate with athletes that you can't speak their language. And it's been a huge learning curve.
That's really interesting. Going back to the kind of corporate side of things, are there any things that you've taken from them and the way they work? As you say, they're high performance, but in a different kind of remit. Is there anything you've taken from them that you can apply to sport?
Yeah, so I think that we all think that we're holistic coaches in our nature. So, we all look at all the areas. But what I did find is that actually when you start to look into other areas from a holistic point of view, you can get some really good performance improvements. So what I do realize now is stress is stress. And what I mean by that, if I look back at my time in rugby, is that I probably disregarded what outside or external stresses a lot of our athletes go through and how that will affect them in their day-to-day performance. And what I mean by that is that we react the same from both a mental stress point of view and a physical stress point of view, physiologically, psychologically, etc. So really getting to the foundations of good sleep, good nutrition, just general health, and setting that foundation that we can push forward. And I really do think that sometimes as coaches, we like to focus on these minute details that, they're needed, but really we need to be focusing on those other 99% things that sometimes I think we take for granted. But definitely working with CEOs, the two big things for me was always to start with trying to increase their sleep and just trying to increase their general physical activity. They were two of my main kickers that I would always kind of look at and always try to impose on them. Because from a corporate side, there seems to be this, I only need 5 hours sleep, I only need 6 hours sleep, I can do an all-nighter, etc., etc. And what we know is that, you can, but you will pay for it in the long run. And the more times you keep putting yourself under that pressure, your performance is going to struggle. But also the big point of that is that you don't actually know that your performance is deteriorating. You still think that you're doing exactly the same, that you're performing as well as you can. And then if you go and throw in a 7-8 hours sleep on top of that, you then actually realize that, hey, no, that was a load of rubbish, basically. And just put that back to an athletic population, to really get grasping what your guys do outside of you training them. So, at London Welsh, guys would come in, depending, 8, half 8, and then leave, depending on the day, 2:30, 3 o'clock. And we can only really control that portion of the day. So what do they get up to after training? Are they getting good sleep? What's their nutrition? We're fortunate to be able to maybe control 2 or 3 meals a day, but what are they eating in the evenings? Are they fueled and ready to go for performance in the morning? And just these simple, basic things that I think that sometimes we take for granted in terms of the athletes that we work with. So they're the big things, really.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think a classic example, and you'll have experienced as well in rugby, when you've got a player who's just had a newborn baby, and then sleep goes completely out the window. They're stressed, and like you can even sometimes see it in like their wellness scores and things like that. It's crazy what that bigger stress has, and highlighting sleep is one of the major ones. Which is quite nice because we just actually had an article about the importance of sleep on the website. Now I've been looking through your Instagram recently, did a bit of research for kind of questions for you, because there's some really good stuff on there. And one of the ones that's really important now, obviously with COVID-19 and lockdown, and the restrictions on training and things, was the need to prepare for going back into contact. Do you want to touch on perhaps a couple of recommendations you gave in that post and the importance of it?
Yeah, so we can't, rugby or contact sport it's a brutal game, and being able to speak to a few of the guys that I did coach, the Premiership rugby is now becoming an even bigger contact collision based sport, even more than it used to be. And the way that those guys are training in the week, they're not really getting much done because they're just kind of recovering. So, in terms of with the amateur guys that are coming around, basically what can you do? So can you hit some floor? Can you do some tumbling? Can you make sure that you're doing some neck strength work? If you are fortunate enough to be able to be with anybody that's a similar body weight to you, can you do some type of grappling work? Can you do all those things that that we try in training to stimulate or recreate the contact, but unfortunately you can't. So it's trying to do as much preparation from that, in terms of, it's a great opportunity to really nail down any underlying issues that you've got, any shoulder problems, shoulder stability work, all these types of different things that you can do. And then I think that the big thing is going to be is that we don't get to a point where it's like, right, okay, we can go back to training, and everybody's been so wound up to sat indoors that they go back at 100% and they just start trying to knock out the crap out of each other. And then that's when injuries, come along. And I think it's similar to, we used to have it whereby, let's say, the season finishes and then the guys have 4 or 5 weeks off. Well, very few of them do any running base work. We normally promote this kind of off feet, give the boys a bit of a rest. And then they come in, and most teams, or what we did see sometimes, is that, right, especially with the coaches, they want to go. It's pre-season. It should be tough. It should be hard. But there needs to be this kind of reintroduction, this reconditioning into all those types of the muscles and that movement mechanics, etc. And I think with contact, it's no different. That it may take 3, 4, 5 weeks for guys to get back into that live conditioning. And, I hope that coaches and S&Cs around can think, right, well, how are we going to reintegrate this? What are we going to do? How are we going to get it so that if we look at our, general prep, specific prep, what type of drills can we do to slowly increase that conditioning, slowly increase that tactical, technical awareness of where they need to be putting their heads, shoulders, etc. And lastly, probably is really slowly building back in that fatigue level, so that we know that most injuries from a contact point of view are more to do with poor technique, being under fatigue, and making sure that guys are fresh, fully recovered in terms of their bouts and their work to rest ratios. They're some of the things I think.
No, some great points there. And I know I've been speaking to some coaches today, and I know they're itchy fingers already trying to plan as soon as they get the go ahead of when lockdown's over of getting into things. But you're right, it's got to be measured and slowly progressed, for safety in terms of injuries and things. So good points. Another thing you've talked about recently is like breathing for performance. Now, what are some of the methods you've used and the results you've had with it?
So I've kind of come around to it just by a few friends talking about it, and some of the guys I do, the power, speed, endurance, Brian McKenzie works. He's been on some podcasts, and really it's the whole idea of being able to tolerate CO2, and I was in alongside that maybe a couple of years ago with a book called The Oxygen Advantage, and this idea that most people breathe mouth to mouth. And really what we're trying to do is that two things. One, we want to build up this ability to tolerate CO2 in our body. And second of all, that means that we need to not blow off or breathe out CO2 all the time. So from that point of view, there are the things that I've tried to kind of work on. So nasal breathing, working through the gears. So what they talk about is kind of nose to nose breathing is highly aerobic, it's highly efficient. And, a prime example now is that everybody is out running. That's the go-to kind of conditioning. And how many people do you hear who are panting nose to nose, and they're just in that anaerobic energy system all the time? And then in terms of how I've kind of tried to implement it is, especially in terms of hockey, if we think of, it's a 40 to 60 second shift followed by a, 90 seconds kind of window of recovery. So some of the stuff was basically, mouth to mouth, and then you try to calm down, then it's nose to mouth, and then it's back to nose, and you're trying to recover as quick as possible to get ready for that next intensity bout. And then really trying to push the nasal breathing, steady state, all those types of things that we were building in to really promote that idea of actually people being more conscious about their breathing. Now, I don't think that we just go out and train, we don't really think about it. So that's where I've been kind of leaning towards of late.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. I've kind of stumbled onto a few things, myself in the past, and there's loads of stuff about breathing to, control, even anxiety and things like that, and like say for recovery in between sets, that's stuff I've used in the past, and also just the nasal breathing to kind of control the intensity you're training at. Like say, if you want to get an aerobic stimulus and you don't have a heart rate monitor, then if you're nasal breathing comfortably, then you should be in that comfortable aerobic zone. So that's stuff I've looked at. I haven't read it yet, but there's a book out, I think it's relatively recently, called Warrior Breathing. I think it might be worth looking into, but it's definitely stuff I've keep coming back onto. So it's stuff I want to look into a little bit more. So I'm glad you spoke about that. Now this next question is something we ask all the guests on the podcast, and it's: what do you think is the biggest mistake rugby players make when it comes to strength and conditioning?
Wow. Okay. So yeah, so that's an interesting one. I think that what you need to understand, or I think everyone needs to understand, that the ability to create force is hugely important, but sometimes the rate of force production is probably more important. And along that line is that there's this need, especially with young players, to try and get as big as possible. And I think that what you need to try and do is basically take a step back and think about, what your position requires, what you need to do, and to think about you as an individual playing in a team sport. So, for example, my exercise selection is vastly different to your exercise selection from a player's point of view in terms of the choices that we make. You don't have to squat to develop lower body strength. You don't have to bench press to develop upper body strength. So as soon as you can start to learn what your body can do, I think that's a huge advantage to have over everyone else around. And to add another point, but I think that the last year has really made me appreciate that everybody, especially young athletes and young rugby players, I've seen it time and time again, they're just super impatient. So, strength, power, speed, conditioning, it's not something that's going to be a 4-week block, a 12-week block, a year's process. It's a long career process that you need to just keep ticking away at. You just need to keep getting that little bit stronger, because you have to play rugby. You're not full-time trainers. You're a rugby player that is training to improve their rugby. You're not training for training's sake and then play a couple of games of rugby. And I think that's where amateurs get it wrong, is that they just train in the week, they just throw something against the wall, and they hope that that's going to transfer across to how they play on a Saturday, as opposed to in a professional environment, so from some of the best coaches, they know exactly the work they're going to do is going to transfer to them on Saturday and Sunday. Because our job as strength and conditioning coaches is to allow that athlete to go out and express their skills come Saturday, Sunday, or Friday evening, whenever it is. Sorry about that. That was a long
No.
question.
No, I agree. That's kind of what you see, and it's always or not always, but a common thing is people just want to get, or players just want to get bigger, without going, well, yeah, size is one thing, but is that really going to help your performance? So some good points. I'm not trying to catch you out, but then what would you, or how would you deal with it when you've got a coach and or a player who needs to get bigger? How do you do or get bigger the right way, I guess?
So lean body mass gain, or trying to gain as much mass as possible without, non-functional tissue development, or sorry, not tissue development, but body fat. So it depends, again, everyone's different, but if it's a young player, really it's to try and just, keep those calories high, you need to be in a calorie surplus. And again, they need to learn. So, we had a couple of guys at London Welsh and they were young, and it's quite interesting that, and I don't know if you found it, but as a strength and conditioning coach, you can be working at the same club. So, for example, that although I stayed at London Welsh for 6 years, I was exposed to 4 completely different coaches. One coach was a super talented coach, very skill based, tactically excellent. The other coach was just like, right, let's just get the guys as big as possible, and we're just going to beat teams up. So if you imagine you're a player then, 1 year you're being told, no, 110 kilos for a second row is great. And the next year, well, you need to be 115, 120 to even get a look in. So to go back to your question is that, I think that the coach sits down with the player and basically says, right, you are looking to develop your lean body mass. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you all the nutritional information, all the supplementation, what you need to do, also alongside that is that we will make sure that the conditioning work you do alongside it will be the minimum amount to make sure that you are going to maintain that. And on the flip side of that is that you will be able to do extra hypertrophy sessions across the course of the week. And then we sit down and then we just say, right, well, we monitor them, weigh-ins twice a week, 3 times a week. And we want to see that linear kind of trend over the next 4-6 weeks. And then it's down. Then what we've done is we've taken all the excuses away from the player and basically said, right, okay, 4 weeks, you're not putting any weight on. And we work it back, right, well, you're not doing as much running as the other guys. You've got extra hypertrophy sessions. What's your nutrition like? What's your nutrition like outside of the club? And that's how we kind of work it, basically.
No, I like it.
That answers.
Yeah, covering all the bases. That's good stuff. Now, you mentioned in your previous answer, you don't have to squat to get strong. You don't have to bench press to get strong in your upper body. That's a great answer at the moment because some athletes are in lockdown. They can't have access to the gym. They're just stuck with body weight. What would be your kind of recommendations to players stuck at home?
So, my biggest one is that you need to get a plan. You need to. I posted something like this that you need to stop doing challenges for the first one. I'm on a couple of WhatsApp groups with some rugby players, and every day they get sent through. Right, I've just done this challenge that has got 100 burpees and da. And all you're doing is you're just applying fatigues to the system. So first and foremost, get a plan. And you sit down and say, right, I've got this type of equipment, whether it be bands, kettlebells, whatever you can try and do. And then basically say, right, well, I know that I need to progress. So I need to either increase number of reps, time under tension. So I think that if you look at it, I think that if you step back and say, right, think more of a bodybuilding approach at the moment. And what I mean by that is that, the muscles don't know how much weight you're lifting. So really focusing on contraction, using time under tension, using drop sets, using any mechanical drop sets. I'm not a great fan of force reps per se, but, can you start to do some force reps, if you've got a training partner, if you're living with somebody that you're able to do it. And those are the types of things that, I think, if you look at, the research, well, you need to go to near failure most sets, whether that's true, but definitely I don't think you need to be doing, 30, 40 reps, etc. and your form just gets crap. And, you're just asking for yourself for injuries, basically. And they're the types of things that I would, or I have been, or would recommend to people out there, basically.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned about not just doing these challenges because, like you say, it is just you're just chasing fatigue. The reason you train is to adapt to improve your ability in whatever it is you're training. So there's got to be some sort of planned progression.
I've got no issue with testing. Training is testing and testing is training. I've got no issue with guys doing challenges. The thing is that you do a challenge. Well, the idea is then 2, 3, 4 weeks, 5 weeks down the line, you want to redo that challenge, and then you see if your plan or your training has improved where you're at. And that's where you and I would probably have to do pre-season testing, because we want to highlight to the players at the end of pre-season, hey, look, you were here. Now because you followed this plan, you're there. Or with the coaches, this guy needed to improve these physical qualities, and now they're getting better. And it's kind of auditing the program. And, if you keep just doing stupid challenges, you're never really going to know if you're developing. So I think it's a huge opportunity, lockdown, to people step back and maybe deload some of the movements that they're not great at, and to get back to, a more of a mobility based body weight kind of progressions.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's not going to hurt going back to some of those unilateral, leg exercises and improving relative strength, and deloading from stuff that's going to be, heavy loading through the season, it'll be kind of nice for them to come back fresh when they do. Some great points there. Right, next question is, what advice would you give to an upcoming strength coach?
So I was thinking about this. I think it was I thought it was a big question, but from my point of view, one of the things that with London Welsh, and especially with our internships, is that probably one of the last things that I would do before off season is we'd be looking for obviously interns to support us for the following year. So I'd print out all these CVs and cover sheets to kind of read on a beach or by a pool to kind of think about the guys that we wanted to work with next year. And really I got used to going through them all, and I used to just read cover letter after cover letter. And one of the biggest things that we'd look for is coaching experience. And what I mean by that is you don't have to be coaching strength and conditioning to gain coaching experience. I think that we coach strength and conditioning because we enjoy coaching. Obviously, we love everything else that goes with it. But what drives me is that I like to coach people. I like to impart knowledge. I like to see progressions. So bring it back down. So depending on what age you decide, right, this is where I want to be, these are my long-term goals, I'd suggest just get some coaching experience. And it doesn't matter whether that's, under eight football or, netball or cricket or whatever. Just start coaching. And it just teaches you the basics of being a good coach, right? Well, I need a plan. I need to set up. I need to be on time. I need to control this group of individuals. And you'll find that, this is, maybe, but coaching under eights is probably a lot tougher than coaching in elite professional environments, sometimes depending on the mental age of your elite professional, as we know. But what it does is it just gives you experience, and then as you go along, that age group can grow, So for me, that's what I did. As I started coaching swimming, and then I did some field hockey stuff, and that so at university, I was learning about sports science, I was learning about this, but I was also learning, right, well, how to coach, what do people enjoy doing, trying to bring in this aspect of doing different things, varying it, fun. But then also what you do is you have that idea of right, well, that session wasn't great, this was good. You have a little bit of look at how you review your performance, and then that leads on to coaching seniors and building through the levels. And then if that cover letter lands on my lap and I'm like, right, okay, well, Jamie's keen on coaching, I know that then if I put you in with a small group of players and I say, look, this is the the session that I want you to deliver, I know that you'll have the confidence, or you'll have some past experience of how to deliver. And I'd much prefer that individual, because then we can start to discuss philosophies, methods, principles, etc., and build on it. Whereas sometimes if we go the reverse route where you've just been purely academic, everything, books, you can quote me research papers, you can do this, you can do that. But if I put you in a group of 3 or 4 players and you've got no experience, and you kind of like, that's one that might take a little bit longer to develop. It's not to say you'll never make it as a strength coach or a coach, for example, but it just means that I think that's the way I would go, basically.
Yeah, I think one of the first questions I usually ask at interview is, have you had experience with coaching groups as opposed to just individuals? Not, you can still learn a lot coaching individuals. I think any coaching is great, but yeah, just having that experience, so you feel like you could trust them with a group, like you say. So it's definitely great advice. Are there any books or resources you'd recommend for young coaches as well?
I think that we realise that we're probably on this cyclical strength and conditioning, is that we'd always go back to a Bondarchuk, a Verkhoshansky, all those types of guys, and I think they're good areas just to get some grounding. that you know that if you're working in a sport that requires you to train and then transfer that training across into your pitch performance or on field, those are the types of guys that you'd want to have read or have some knowledge about. And then, you know, there's some great books coming out, you know, David Joyce, all those books that put everything neatly into position. You know, and I think also nowadays, one of our biggest questions that we'd ask is, you know, where do you go? So what websites are you looking at? What are you know, how are you doing? And, you know, we'd want you to, you know, to quote some, you know, especially for strength and power, we'd want you to know Louis Simmons. We'd want you to know, you know, Dave Tate, Elite FTS. We want you to know all those types of websites so that we know that you're kind of on the same page to us, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And lastly, where can people learn more about you?
So obviously Instagram's, you know, a blessing and a curse, but, you know, the Athlete Tribe is where I'm based at pretty much and communicating from. And if people want to drop me a line or whatever, however it goes, I'm happy to chat.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you very much, Lee, and all the best.
No worries. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you, Lee. Great to talk to you. Tons of great information there, and all the best for the future. Guys, please check Lee out at the Athlete Tribe on Instagram and his other social media channels. It really is putting some great content out there. It's really worth a look and a follow. And of course, please follow us on the same social media channels and subscribe to us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn, Spotify, whatever you listen to podcasts on, and give us a 5-star review. One of the benefits, if there is one, of lockdown has been being able to get hold of people and do tons of podcasts. There is loads on the way, so stay tuned for more.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. For more quality rugby strength and conditioning information, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Rugby Renegade, building machines.